Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and good morning and good evening for those who are joining us online and from afar. Let me extend a very warm welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us for this discussion here today and for the launch of our report on AI risks. Now, why do we have a report on risks related to AI and to what end? This is part of a long-term, two-phased project at UNIDIR, and the project is focusing on confidence-building measures for artificial intelligence. Now, that's quite a task, I would say, and really an innovative project, and I'm really delighted that we're hosting it and having it at UNIDIR. But as a first step to that project, we wanted to not only map out the risks related to AI, many of them have been discussed and are known, but I would say rather at a superficial kind of stage so far. But we also wanted to provide a taxonomy, a structure to categorize the different risks, to make them more manageable and to prepare us for the second phase of this project when, with states, we will be discussing ideas to tackle these problems, to mitigate the risks. And as I said, as a pre-step to this, the report today looks into the broad landscape of risks. At UNIDIR, of course, we're really making it a point to have a balanced approach to the topic and to all new technologies. We consider the benefits and the risks, but this today specifically is on the risks. The list there is quite long, and I'm sure many of you will know it. There is risks, of course, when AI is applied in military contexts, risk related to misperception, miscalculation, things going wrong, like they could with any technology, of course. There are risks related to bias, the black box problem and lack of transparency, attribution and accountability, and of course profound questions, ethical questions, legal questions when it comes to human agency and human control, especially when we're talking about critical tasks. So we'll be launching and presenting the report here today. As you all know, the topic is gaining more and more momentum, of course. The Security Council had its first ever, I think, discussion of AI-related risks this July. Many other things happening on the multilateral stage. And of course, the new Agenda for Peace also gives critical attention to the risks and the impacts that artificial intelligence could have on international peace and security. So with all that in mind, I would like to thank you all for coming and participating in our discussion here today. I would like to thank UNIDIR's donors and especially the donors of the Security and Technology Program, without whose support all of this would not be possible. Let me say that Dr. Giacomo Persi Paoli, who heads the Security and Technology Program at UNIDIR, he'll be the master of ceremony in a moment. But before he is, I'll hand over now to Ambassador Robert Indenbosch. Thank you very much for joining us here today from the Kingdom of the Netherlands, of course, I should say, and he will now deliver opening remarks. The floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Geist, dear Robin. Esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, indeed, it's my pleasure to deliver an opening statement here, because I think one of the main aims for us with our REAIM event, summit, how you want to call it, was to put artificial intelligence in the military domain on the agenda. And I think we can claim some modest success if I just look back at the last 2 weeks here in New York. And one of the reasons was indeed to underline that of the REAIM summit was that the international community has to take responsibility for the potential applications of AI technology, and especially within the military domain. And as you were saying also, the Netherlands wanted to address opportunities, but also challenges and risk, and there the two things come together, what we have been doing in The Hague and what is the report now presenting. Because we think that challenges around artificial intelligence are not only of a technical nature, and they might even have geopolitical consequences. I think also one of the issues we discussed at the side event organized by Pakistan that was very well underlined. While the integration of artificial intelligence technologies creates an unprecedented number of opportunities to boost human capabilities, especially in decision-making, something that has not always been underlined very much so far. It also raises significant legal, security, and ethical concerns related, for example, to transparency, reliability, predictability, accountability, and bias. And these concerns are amplified if you operate in a high-risk military context, and that is very much the truth at this moment, I would say. Therefore, it's high time there will be political guidance, and we have no time indeed to lose. And this is why the Netherlands hosted the RE-AIM conference in February. And we would like to highlight that on the one hand, you have the military advantages, but on the other side, the potential risks. And that was quite understood, I think, by the more than 2,000 attendees, official delegations from 80 countries, and representatives from industry, academia, think tanks, and civil societies in The Hague in February. And we were successful to put it on the agenda. As I just said, we are facing it almost every day here, either in the meeting room or in one of the side events. The aim of the conference was very much to do the groundwork for a common international agenda within the parameters set by existing international law, because artificial intelligence is not operating in a legal vacuum. There is still international law applicable, also international humanitarian law, and it might be as old as 1899 or 1907, the Hague Conventions, but they are still applicable in many ways. The interest shown by the international community was, in our view, a good start, but it's only the start of a broader discussion, as we are having today here in the room, but also with those that are on the screen following the discussion. We think RE-AIM 2023 was a good start, but we have to continue, and we are very grateful to our Republic of Korea partners, the co-organizers of the summit in The Hague, that they will have a next summit in Seoul in 2024. The issue is then, of course, to set new steps. And to be honest, there are no straight answers and there is no straightforward process. It's all very much still under discussion and it's all still very much under development. And we think that new challenges require also new thinking. And what we would like to do is to collect also new thoughts. And for that reason, we will be organizing regional workshops in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. And these regional workshops will aim to raise further awareness, build mutual understanding, as well as capacity, and acquiring input, the new thoughts, to include in the next RE-AIM summit. In addition, we will be setting up a global commission on responsible artificial intelligence, which will support and advise on fundamental norm development and policy coherence in the field of military AI. And the objective of this global commission is to formulate not only long-term, but also some short-term recommendations on norm development and the road ahead towards responsible AI in the military domain. To conclude, we believe the Netherlands that the only way forward is a strong involvement of states all over the world that are not only the ones entirely new to the topic, but also the ones that are already much more advanced, the ones that are cautious, and the ones that want to move faster than some of us might want to do at this moment. But we have to try and bring that all together and to work on it together. For that reason, I would also like to commend the work of UNIDIR in supporting governments all around the world, including my own, in better understanding the implication of artificial intelligence in the military domain. And we think that your report on the risks of AI is really helpful for the potential stakeholders, being governments, but also civil society, industry, academia, to work on safeguarding the international security within the rules-based international order. And if we look further, then indeed we will see your work also on confidence building measures, and we also very much looking forward to that. Without further ado, I would now like to hand back the floor to you and thank again UNIDIR for all the work done and for all the work that you will still be doing for us in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Robin, also for your opening remarks. And Ambassador, allow me also to express our gratitude not only for your continued support to the Security and Technology Program, but also for having pioneered, if you want, and become the champion of the topic of responsible AI in the military domain more broadly, and really have pioneered that discussion at the international level. At UNIDIR, we try to be pioneers ourselves, so to speak. So in our role as a research institute, we as Robin mentioned, our final goal is really to work towards the development of the creation of confidence-building measures that could be used in the context of artificial intelligence. However, when we conceptualize this project, we basically ask ourselves, what are some of the main barriers or challenges that need to be addressed before we even get to the point where we can speak about confidence-building measures in a meaningful way. And we identified, well, at least two that we try to address with this report. The first is creating a shared understanding of the problem space. So what problems are we trying to fix with confidence-building measures? And there is no shortage of lists of risks that AI can bring to different parts of society and sectors, including international security, but we couldn't find a single framework, a single reference that could be used by states to kind of define and put boundaries around the problem space. And then the second challenge was like, okay, once we have identified the problem space, we have to make sure that there is, at least for the purpose of this study, there is a shared understanding of what some of those concepts actually mean. We don't want to go as far as saying we're proposing a global lexicon for AI risks. That's probably too far. But we wanted to come up with clear definitions that could be used as working definitions by states when they will be consulted in the future stages of this study on the topic of confidence-building measures. So defining the problem space, and giving you almost like a glossary or an organized glossary of key terms and key risks that can be associated with AI, that if you think there is merit in this approach to be taken forward, that's an added bonus. But at the very least, we hope that this report sets the foundations upon which we can then build constructive dialogue with you, states, but also with a broader range of stakeholders that are going to have a fundamental role in helping us translate your needs as states into something that can actually be done in the context of artificial intelligence. So this is just to give you a little bit of a broader context. We launched the report last week, Thursday, I believe. I'm not sure many of you spent their weekends reading it, so we're going to start this briefing with a short recap by Joanna of what were the main findings, but you can also find the report online. Before I give the floor to Joanna for her presentation, I also wanted a few housekeeping remarks. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available after the event is concluded on our YouTube channel. So if you want to share it with any of your colleagues that couldn't be here today, please do. There will be time to ask questions. If you're in the room, it's easy, just press the button to book the microphone and you can make your intervention. If you are one of the 50+ people that are following us online, you can use the chat function to ask your question that I will then relay to our panelists. Now, there will be, as I mentioned, there will be a first presentation by Joanna, and that will be followed by also another presentation by our guest speaker on the very far left of the table here, Lauren Kahn, who's a senior research analyst at the Center for Security and Emerging Technology, CSET. So, Joanna, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Giacomo, and thank you also to the other speakers for your kind words and introductions and for providing more background and context to the project, and also where we are today in terms of conversations about AI and governance and risk mitigation. So Thank you all also for who are here in the room and for those of you who are following us online. I'm very pleased to be here today indeed and to introduce our new report, which was launched and put on the website last week, and which was many months in the making because it also consisted of a lot of conversations and interviews with technical experts and experts from various fields who work on AI and various topics related to AI and convergence. So the full title of the report is AI and International Security, Understanding the Risks and Paving the Path for Confidence-Building Measures. So as the title says, it really captures the focus of the report, which is a focus on risks and understanding the risk landscape, but also the larger goal, which is to advance conversations about CBMs. So, as also mentioned by Robin earlier, as the calls to mitigate the risks of AI begin to intensify, we wanted to provide a clearer framework for understanding the risks and doing so in a comprehensive way. Also, for those of you who followed our event yesterday, either in the room or online, you will see that today's conversation really ties in very well with what was discussed yesterday, because with this report, we also wanted to look at risks in a more holistic sense. So to really go beyond the focus on lethal autonomous weapon systems or on the final stages of the targeting process. So we really wanted to provide a more comprehensive and holistic understanding of risks and what AI really means for the military world, but also for international security more broadly. So next slide, please. Just as a very brief recap to say that now with this report we have sort of formally completing the phase 1 in our project, which is a risk mapping exercise. So trying to elaborate a risk taxonomy and to analyze the way risks are interrelated or reinforcing each other. And the following stage will be followed by multi-stakeholder discussions and really an attempt to advance options for CBMs. Next slide, please. So before I delve into the presentation of the findings and of the taxonomy itself, I just want to preface this by saying just a few words about the taxonomy itself and also to clarify the scope of the report. So this is a framework to map the risks of AI in a way that allows us to understand risks across the life cycle of AI. It's not, at this point, an all-purpose categorization of risks. So we are really looking at risks in a more narrow sense, if you will, in the context of international peace and security. So we're not covering all the risks of AI, and of course the conversation then would be virtually limitless. It's also not a hierarchy of risks, so we don't want to really say, or we are not in a position to say which risks are more urgent than others. And it's also not a menu of actions or mitigation strategies at this point. It's really a presentation or a framework for understanding risks in a way that can perhaps, hopefully, later lead to a more actionable points and discussions. So with this, I will now introduce the report and the risk taxonomy. And of course, this will be a very brief introduction, and there is much more technical explanation and more detail in the report itself. But just to say that the taxonomy identifies two main clusters of risks. So next slide, please. The first cluster of risks refers to risks of AI technology. So you see now this table here. It's not very readable, but I will go into more detail on each of these. This is just to really present a very broad and sort of high-level view of the taxonomy. So, as I said, the first cluster of risks includes risks of AI technology. So these are vulnerabilities that stem from limitations of AI systems as technical systems, or limitations that emerge from humans interacting with AI. And this includes three broad categories of risks. So the first is safety risks, which are the limitations of AI systems that are not that do not come in the form of attacks, but are really unintended sort of failures. Then we have the cybersecurity risks, which are intentional attacks on AI systems and which aim to compromise how an AI system learns and acts. And finally, we have human-machine interaction risks, which stem from unique challenges that arise when humans interact with AI systems. Next slide. The second large cluster of risk includes risks of AI to global security. So here we identify three main categories of risks. The first are risks of miscalculation, which refer to uses of AI that can lead to incorrect representations of evolving operational context, or more generally of adversary behavior. And I will explain shortly more about this, because of course it's a more encompassing term, but just to sort of place it on the map now, the first risk is a risk of miscalculation. Then we have a second category of risks, which are risks of escalation. So risks that AI poses to the acceleration or the increase of intensity in conflict. And finally, we have third category of risks, which are risks of proliferation. So proliferation of new weapon systems or of AI itself. And again, I will discuss this a bit in a bit more detail shortly. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, now let's go a bit in more detail on each of these categories. So like I said, the first large cluster of risks were risks of AI technology. So with this, I will now go very briefly into a bit of a detail on each of the three risks identified here. Next slide. So the first main category of risks here are safety risks. So safety risks in AI refer to inherent limitations of AI systems, and there are unintended failures. So the system is not attacked by any malicious actor. It may simply perform poorly or worse than expected and desired for a combination of reasons. Of course, there are the list of safety risks and safety issues in AI systems is very, very long, and what you will see also on the slide is just a few very brief examples to illustrate what safety risks mean. So, for example, we have the problem of brittleness and distributional shifts, which refer to the inability of AI, or rather often even if not the inability, but the poor ability of AI to generalize, or to generalize well when it's presented with new data. And of course, the task specification challenges are very common when there is a mismatch between what the designer of a system intends to do with that system and what the system actually learns and actually does in reality. Next slide, please. The second category of risks in this cluster of risks are the cybersecurity risks. So these are deliberate and unintended attacks on AI systems. So of course, I'm sure probably some of you know from the discussions on cybersecurity, this include the types of attacks that are common to digital systems. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability attacks. And this aim to really compromise various parts of the system, such as by either stealing hidden information or by interfering with data and making the system learn counterproductively. So attacks on AI systems are not actually that difficult to execute. And many vulnerabilities in such systems are also more complex because they make patching more complicated than for traditional software. And of course, there is in the report there's more detail on this and what this also means from a governance perspective. And also, as mentioned on the slide, just to provide a teaser, there is quite an ample discussion in the report on what the large language models bring to the discussion in terms of cybersecurity risks, because there are many new vulnerabilities that have to be understood and explored in more detail. Next slide, please. So the third category of risks in this first cluster of risks are the risks that emanate from human-machine interaction. So these are significant risks that arise in the context of humans using AI systems, and that can come in the form of either misuses of the technology or simply inappropriate use. For example, we have issues of trust that are very common, of automation bias, when we either trust a system too much or we trust it too little. And often many failures that occur especially in the context of a use of autonomous systems are not because the system fails in any way technically, but simply because it's not used appropriately, or there is a lot of misunderstanding also from the part of operators on where the bounds and the performance of the system is limited. Next slide, please. All right, so having looked at the risks of the technology itself in a more zoomed in way, now let's zoom out a bit and look at AI and global security. So what sort of risks AI poses to global security? And of course, I should just mention here, and I'll I'll repeat, is that the first cluster of risk doesn't mean that it's in a way isolated from the latter. So risks that are related to the technology absolutely impact the way AI impacts global security, but we wanted to group them in a way that makes also more sense for the purpose of our discussion. So next slide, please. The first category of risks here are risks of miscalculation. So these refer to the many ways in which AI systems can contribute to incorrect or biased representations of operational context or adversary behavior or simply of international relations. So the way AI will impact and has already begun to impact the entire information space, from intelligence work to use in various decision support tools, means that AI can significantly enhance the risk of miscalculation in conflict and also more broadly in introducing uncertainty in international relations. Of course, again, the introduction of and the rapid use of large language models over the past year or so has also exposed how serious this risk is, because LLMs are more and more touted for their ability to be used in, for example, in intelligence work. And this will have very important implications on how military operators and people who are sort of using the systems are able to understand or to grasp an evolving operational context. And next slide, please. In a way related to miscalculation, but different in other ways as well, we have the risks of escalation. So escalation refers to ways in which AI can increase the scope and intensity of conflict. A concern here, and that has been very frequently mentioned, refers to the integration of AI in nuclear command and control or in early warning systems, but it should be very clear that the risks of escalation are actually much broader. Escalation can also occur as a result of AI being used to, for example, to increase speed and lethality of conventional systems. So one way to think about escalation is not just with the nuclear nexus, but really more broadly on even use of conventional systems. And AI can also be used for disinformation, which again can have escalatory consequences, especially at the tactical level where the conduct of operations can be severely disrupted and impacted. Next slide, please. The final group of risks in this cluster includes proliferation risks. So proliferation risks are, of course, a big area of concern, and proliferation risks began in a way to be more present in policy discussions as a result of AI converging with other domains, such as biology and life sciences, which prompted really many concerns that AI will be misused for creating novel pathogens and biochemical weapons. Of course, it's important to assess this risk very realistically, but there may be many barriers to execution, but the risks are certainly there. So there are also convergence risks that are not just related to the biofield, but also more broadly, for example, from the convergence with the cyber domain. So here we can see the potential for AI to be used for conducting cyber operations at scale. And finally, of course, there is also risks of proliferation along a different axis of concerns, which is proliferation of AI itself and of autonomous systems. So, of course, we can think about AI being very easily proliferating because AI software can be repurposed very easily at a low cost, and this has really profound implications for how various regimes of governance already are managing, for example, export controls or other arms control regimes. So the proliferation of AI is one concern, but of course there's also the proliferation of autonomous weapons as such, which has already, in a way, we can already see how there is more and more reliance and scaling up of autonomous functions in weapon systems, and including in some types of loitering munitions, for example. And many autonomous functions in some such systems actually are latent, but they can be, in a way, switched on, so to speak, and they can be made more autonomous. So we haven't actually seen the full scope and scale of what very systems that are very advanced and have very advanced autonomous functions can do, but in many ways the technology is already there, only that it's not yet in a way used at scale. Next slide, please. So having provided this, again, I should repeat, very broad sort of presentation of the risk landscape, the question emerges, of course, where do we go from here? So we have, in a way, a risk map, a risk framework, but of course the question now is really how to move forward, and perhaps in some ways creating a taxonomy of risk is the easy way, the easy part of the process, because we can, with research, with conversations with technical experts, we can create such a framework. But then the question really emerges on how to translate this into shared norms and shared understandings of mitigation strategies. So, of course, it's very important to remain realistic and to not over-exaggerate the extent to which AI will devastate the security risk landscape. However, even if we look at what is already possible with the state of the technology today, we can safely say that AI is really a very powerful and transformative technology. So also another point that has to be highlighted is that risks are interrelated. So the risks that I mentioned in the first part of the taxonomy, for example, safety risks, can absolutely and often interfere with other issues in the use of, or other aspects of weapon systems, and can lead to escalation. So, for example, when we talk about AI and escalation, the question of escalation there is hardly ever an isolated element, but it's really can also result from improper use of a weapon system or from safety concerns, safety risks, which can cause a system to fail and in a way to lead to escalation. So risks are absolutely interrelated, but it's important in a way to also think of them as categories that are standalone. So next slide, please. It will be very important going forward to really ask and attempt to answer questions about how to build CBMs. So, of course, the management of risks requires always a very clear and deep technical understanding of those risks. But there is, of course, it's very important to think about also the political will and the willingness of states and other actors to create a framework where the technology is used in a reliable, in a safe and transparent way. So we want the rest of the project really to engage multiple stakeholders in a meaningful way, to have an honest conversation about what is feasible and realistic in the field of CBMs for AI. So on this slide, for example, I just listed a few questions, but there are many more on how to move forward. So, for example, really, what are the first steps? How do we start to elaborate CBMs in a way that makes sense at the multilateral level? Or what should the CBMs really be about? Should they cover specific categories of risks, or should they be more holistic and general? And what is the confidence really about in this context? Or how should other stakeholders, such as private companies or the industry, be part of this conversation? And perhaps, and I think many of you have seen probably discussions from the cyber domain, there are many ways in which we can leverage lessons learned from other fields, but many things about AI are new and different, and we need to be to approach it as such. So with this, I will conclude, because I'm, of course, looking forward to the conversation that we will have at the end, and I can just pass the floor to Lauren. Thank you all very much.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, so thank you so much for having me. That was a really helpful, I think, presentation to set the stage. I'm going to try and take a little bit of step back, since there is a very robust risk taxonomy provided in the report. But I want to give a little bit of a broad overview on some of the 3 buckets of risks that I see the introduction of AI into military systems really exacerbate, or I see as fundamentally changing in a way that other technologies do not, which I really think overlaps well with that second bucket of risks that Ioana outlined. And I will try to contextualize them a little bit, and then also move on to seeing why confidence building measures in particular are appropriate here versus other sort of mechanisms. Early progress on CBMs, and then next steps as we seek to build out these efforts further. So as we all are familiar, militaries around the world are really seeking to gain a strategic edge over their adversaries by integrating artificial intelligence into their arsenals. We already see the use of artificial intelligence on the battlefield in a wide variety of contexts, not limited to weapon systems such as facial recognition technology, targeting and logistics, and natural language processing, et cetera. AI and machine learning in particular are being used both in civilian and military sectors, which creates risks across society and in kind of new and ways that we haven't seen before. Research has shown that many in the artificial intelligence and machine learning communities are concerned about whether militaries can be trusted to develop safe and reliable artificial intelligence. And especially in the current geopolitical context, there is a fear that competitive pressures to deploy AI systems and to get ahead of adversaries might quickly lead to safety and ethics being overlooked, for example. So this could incentivize militaries, for example, to take shortcuts that increase what I see as three main strategic risks. One, the risk of lethal accidents. Two, unintentional conflicts. And three, inadvertent escalation. So these are applicable more broadly, as Joanna mentioned, as well as in nuclear context as well. So for the first kind of area that I'm interested in, lethal accidents, these refer to, in this case, instances where AI-powered systems might cause harm or loss of life due to malfunction or error. So first, military applications of artificial intelligence may not work as intended due to flaws in the algorithms themselves. Things like inadequate training data, the algorithm's complexity, biased data, biased coding, or unintentional data sabotage or poisoning by adversaries can make accidents more likely when systems are deployed. For example, a malfunctioning AI-enabled targeting system in a conflict could attack friends instead of foes, or friends and foes alike. Or an algorithmic decision aid could derive a flawed estimate of the risk of a particular operational plan, leading to a use of force that either unnecessarily fails or even succeeds, but at a greater cost than required. These risks are further amplified when systems are employed outside of their design contexts, as AI is often brittle. The second, unintentional conflict, occurs when miscommunication or accidents between states lead to conflict. So even if algorithms work as designed, they could unintentionally make conflict more likely. Uncertain about how algorithms will work on the battlefield could create challenges for signaling adversaries through posture or deployments in a crisis or within a conflict. Actors might be uncertain about how AI-enabled systems deployed by an adversary will behave. They might not believe that an AI-enabled autonomous system is programmed as described because of the black box nature of algorithms, could lead to increased skepticisms of claims made about the systems. It's very hard to see when AI is either enabled or whether a system is inherently AI-enabled itself. So even if a state is telling the truth, quote unquote, about a specific system and how it was used, there might not be a way for a third party or another state or even the state that is using those technologies to verify those claims. And third, there's the risk of inadvertent escalation, which refers to intentional actions taken by states that unintentionally cause escalation by an adversary. So there is still substantial uncertainty about the reliability of many AI methods. They're a nascent technology. We don't fully understand how they're used, especially deep learning and related techniques when they can generate opaque outputs, meaning there's not an available chain of logic that explains to a human why the algorithm recommended or engaged in a particular action or behavior. So even with sufficient training data, hedges against biases, and protections from data poisoning and hacking, current systems may not be prepared for testing, evaluation, validation, and verification, or TEVV, of algorithmic systems, particularly AI-enabled autonomous systems, which could engage in theoretical online learning, or in other words, continuous learning, where they evolve as they operate. So in operating at machine speed, AI-enabled autonomous systems could further cause adversaries in a conflict to fear losing a war so quickly that they feel compelled to escalate. For an adversary with nuclear weapons, for example, this could create pressure for a launch posture, such as pre-delegation or launch on warning, that increases the chance of nuclear use. So considering these potential risks associated with the use of AI in military contexts that I have just outlined, it's easy, I think, to become overwhelmed and the thought of out-of-control robots taking over command and control systems. However, I'd like to shift the focus, hopefully, to a more positive or optimistic note. Given the newness of the technology and the widespread acknowledgement of its potential risks, I think we can all agree that there is a pressing need for control and establishment of norms to ensure the safe and ethical development and deployment of AI systems in military contexts. Recent events, namely the situation in Ukraine, I think have created a sort of ironically conducive environment for confidence-building measures aimed at addressing these risks. Such measures could include increased transparency and accountability, enhanced international cooperation, and the development of common standards and guidelines for the use of AI in the military. These can be common sense, and what's helpful about confidence-building measures, they don't have to address all things at one time. They can be stacked and used multilaterally, bilaterally, or unilaterally even to promote these sort of norms and expectations. And so that offers a little bit of flexibility in their execution as well, and allows for a sort of degree of flexibility in evolving as these technologies continue to evolve, and quite rapidly. So I will say there has been some development in this field, though, early progress. In February 2023, at the RIAM Summit, the United States, for example, announced the Political Declaration on Responsible Military Use of Artificial Intelligence and Autonomy. There have been other similar kinds of commitments and statements and principles regarding the ethical and responsible use of AI. But in particular, this statement, I think the U.S. further expressed its intention to collaborate with other states in the near future to voluntarily co-sign onto these principles, marking, I think, what is an important step towards international coordination on AI in military contexts beyond lethal autonomous systems. So these 12 principles include legal reviews, for example, of AI applications to ensure compliance with international humanitarian law, active, transparent efforts to reduce bias in systems, creations of systems with auditable methodologies, data sources, design procedures and documentation, appropriate training for operators, and even assured human control and involvement in decisions of nuclear weapons employment. And so, although non-binding, I think this declaration will serve as a really steady foundation for international cooperation in establishing guidelines for the use of AI in military operations. The significance, I think, of this declaration lies in the fact that it covers, again, not just autonomous weapon systems, but a broader range of AI applications that pose significant risks and that are already being used today. So this proactive initiative, I think, towards global governance is crucial in separating AI policies from those related to autonomy or lethal autonomous weapon systems, again, particularly as AI technology continues to evolve and extend beyond weapons or uncrewed vehicles, et cetera. And so I think not only is this a more realistic assessment of current AI risk, but it opens the door to collaboration and consultation with a wider range of stakeholders that aren't traditionally thought of as defense actors because their AI applications aren't obviously lethal. I think this is incredibly important given that a lot of these underlying technologies are developed not by militaries or defense systems, but by commercial actors and operators. So shared standards for safe uses of military AI could reduce the probability of accidents, standards to herald market access, interoperability, and connectivity. And while they might appear to be technical, standards can predict sort of the baking in of fundamental human rights protections when ethical AI principles are translated into technical standards. Furthermore, in the long run, standardization will facilitate coordination between states and ease on interoperability with allied systems as well. So we are still at the dawn of the application of, I think, of machine learning by militaries, and setting more rigid guides now may create limits to decreased ability or might not be appropriate later. So any agreement would need to be flexible, which again I see as the benefit for CBMs. They need to allow for the establishment of guidelines with the potential to expand as technologies, needs, and circumstances involving military AI mature. And additionally, confidence-building measures avoid prematurely restricting states, as it is essential given the early stages of military artificial intelligence research and development. So again, I think the fact that it is non-binding, that they're broad-ranging, and that you can kind of build and stack them as needed allows for this kind of flexible and more rapid approach to regulating these technologies. And so what's next? So I hope to see an update on the declaration in the coming months that captures the broad endorsement that the United States expects to get, especially from most of the countries investing heavily in artificial intelligence. Thinking about, I think, will be important about what are the next steps after this is released to ensure momentum and further transparency efforts to integrate these principles into design of these systems at the earliest levels, their testing and evaluation, and their adoption by individual states, I think will be really, really important, and there will be a lot of work for collaborators and other organizations to be involved. And I think this alone is not enough. Again, the value add of confidence-building measures that can be built upon. And so again, while this establishes a promising foundation, it will require follow-on continuous efforts at both the individual, unilateral, bilateral, and multilateral levels to really ensure that these efforts are robust and encompassing. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna and Lauren, for your presentations and your briefings. I think, as I mentioned, Joanna tried to basically summarize in 15 minutes 9 months of research. I think she did a great job, but there's definitely more information in the report for you to read. And I'm sure that as you were seeing some of the labels, some of the concepts on the slide, none of them are words or concepts you haven't heard before. However, what we've realized when we were doing our research is that not everyone was giving the same meaning to the same words. And this is part of the problem when you are using the same vocabulary, but you're giving to those words different meanings. So our goal here, while it might seem, okay, well, but I've heard of miscalculation before, I've heard of AI safety before. Our goal here was really to try to come together and come up with a shared taxonomy, a shared language that you could then use going forward. And I think also the questions that Joanna highlighted in the last slide are really key, because CBMs, as was also mentioned by Lauren, have the advantage of being voluntary. They can be scaled up, they can be scaled down, they can be targeting specific issues, etc. But we have to be specific about CBMs. I mean, CBMs are not a silver bullet. They are one of the many tools that exist in the arms control toolbox. But to be effective, they have to be targeted. So, and in order for them to be targeted, we need to be having these conversations, and we need to build, gradually our knowledge from the bottom. Thanks also, Lauren, for pointing out some of the, in addition to another way of thinking about risks, also of fleshing out what is probably the biggest risk of all, which is the race to the bottom when it comes to the potential pressures that states might feel to be the first movers or to deploy this technology before the appropriate safeguards are put in place at the national or international level. And this is my personal view, is that there is so much attention and scrutiny on the topic of AI right now, that the risk of us sleepwalking into a situation in which things just happen without anyone having thought about it, I think is today potentially lower than it was a year ago. Before, you may think what you like of ChatGPT as an app, as a technology, but if it did one certain good thing, was really bring the topic of AI at the top of the policy agenda in pretty much everywhere in the world. And that has, in a way, allowed us to be having these conversations in a bigger context, which I think is important. Clearly, you highlighted, Lauren, the US political declaration. I wanted to highlight also the call to action that was produced as a result of the REAIM summit. The UK will be hosting next month AI safety summit. Next year, there will be the next edition of REAIM. So we are seeing a lot of these initiatives being kind of put on the table. Some of them are more political processes focused, some are more inclusive of the multi-stakeholder community. But what matters is that you're talking about these issues, which to me it's encouraging, and it sets the right kind of context to build upon to develop then these CBMs. So we have about 20 minutes or so to collect some questions from the floor, here in the room, from people online. I saw the chat has been particularly active, but there were more kind of comments than questions. So I do invite our colleagues online. If you have a question, please do write it as a question so I can actually revert to the panel. If not, I'll do my best in trying to extract a question from your comment. But if there is anyone in the room who would like to, ask a question to our panelists or comment on the topic of AI risks and CBMs, the floor is open. Please, Charlie.
Hi. Well, first, I want to start by thanking you very much. I thought that was incredibly helpful. So my name is Charles Ovink. I work at UNIDIR, and I work on responsible AI for peace and security. So I think developing this is incredibly useful. Having some kind of taxonomy we can all sort of work with is incredibly useful. The focus on CBMs is the part that I think of as particularly timely. So to that, I'd be really curious for the panel's thoughts on 3 areas. The first is just, especially given SecTech's relatively broad tech experience, whether there's any lessons learned from other dual-use technology control regimes or other tech domains that particularly jump out to you either in the development of this taxonomy or as you get towards CBMs. And I'm thinking in particular there, that was sparked by, Joanna, you really flagged convergence risks, technological convergence, and that's one I'm very sensitive to, so I'd be really curious of thoughts there. The second is on the reference, I think, Lauren, you made this to legal reviews, and that's a really interesting one, especially given Article 36 reviews in this space. And I was wondering how much you were thinking about existing CBMs and how this could be sort of streamlined into those or be connected, or where some of the disconnects might be. And especially when it comes to things like Article 36 reviews, the capacity to conduct them, whether that's something you put thought into as well. And then lastly, and especially on this vocabulary around risk points, again, I do think this taxonomy is incredibly important. One of the things, and I think you touched on it sort of briefly, is about engaging with others key stakeholders, especially industry. And I'm thinking there about how different some of those definitions can be. And the one that really jumps out, and I'm sure you've thought about it, is existential risk, and how industry tends to define existential risk very, very differently to how we would in a sort of peace and security and disarmament space. But thank you very much again. I thought that was fantastic.
Thank you, Charlie, for both the questions and the positive feedback. Much appreciated. Let's see if there is, there are already three questions in your question, but before we go back to the panel, let's see if there is anyone else in the room who would like to add anything at this point, or another question or observation. No? Okay, then I'll revert back to Joanna and Lauren for your first round of answers.
Thank you, Charlie. That was, those are some really interesting questions, and also very, very timely indeed. So I'll just give it a first shot for the first one. So in terms of lessons learned from other domains. So like I said, we haven't yet delved deeply into this topic, but of course I can provide a sort of general overview. I think there is definitely lessons to be learned from the cyber field, which is also, again, another enabling kind of general purpose technology area of policy where we can certainly learn lessons from there. But surprisingly, when I started to do more research on this last year, I also realized that there are a lot of interesting lessons to be learned from completely different, I mean, not necessarily dual use. Well, in a way, actually, it's dual use. Outer space, for example. I found that, again, I don't want to prejudge in any way the outcome of what will be discussed as we start to really discuss CBMs with other stakeholders. But I found some really interesting, at least conceptual points about how CBMs can advance with lessons from other fields. So, for example, in the outer space domain, discussions about CBMs are very mature, very evolved, and there you see conversations about how CBMs can tackle specific systems or use of certain assets in outer space, but also behaviors. So it's all about behavior, but also about assets, or about technical or more material in a way. Assets. So there's a lot, I think, that can be taken also, not necessarily in terms of really translatable lessons, but also conceptually. So how CBMs are framed in one field might, in a way, inform us about what the appetite is for states to work with, or where the limits are, in terms of how states are willing to sort of to develop certain shared norms. So I think it's absolutely useful to look at the cyber field, which I think is often a comparison we draw very often between AI and cyber, but we can absolutely go into at least an exploratory search for options and for ideas in other domains, or even on biological weapons convention. There is a lot of discussions about CBMs, and again, their conversations have matured quite a bit, and they can really inform us as to how states view CBMs and where the compromise can sort of shape up. So we'll continue more in depth with the more in-depth exploration of this as we move forward. But there's definitely a lot to build from already. I think CBMs is not something that we are developing with this project, but is a very well developed, in a way, very very established concept in international relations. I don't know if, Lauren, you want to cover legal reviews per se, because it was addressed to you, so I'll revert back after.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are wonderful questions. I think, to Joanna's point, in terms of what we can learn from, I think for CBMs, I think definitely outer space and cyber. I would also just caveat that I'm averse to analogies for some of these and more focusing on the mechanisms and what mechanisms have been successful. And those have largely been, from my sort of survey, things that are based on common sense rules that are established already, that can be built on from for the military kind of use for these dual use or general purpose systems, but are based in kind of civil regulations and efforts on these lines. So there's already sort of rules of the road that can be borrowed from things like ICAO and other kinds of industry organizations to establish sort of where do we go from there. So how are they handling those, and how do we then add that in for the military system? So one of my favorite examples, of course, is the Incidents at Sea Agreement, which I think you can learn a lot from that being successful, which really focuses on, I think, avoid some of the issues of AI, which how can you see that it's AI, but instead it focuses on not the systems themselves, but behavior. So looking at those kinds of possible mechanisms and where they might apply and might be adapted, of course, I think is useful. To your point about legal reviews, I think that this is a really important challenge moving forward, and I'm a big advocate for having collaboration between those developing the technology and the policymakers, since I think AI uniquely presents a lot of challenges for implementation. A lot of these processes can be baked into the design of the systems themselves and to TEVV processes. I think that legal reviews should not be something that are added on as an afterthought, but should be integrated into those systems from the very design. How do you do a legal review, again, if you can't see what's being used, if there's no transparency and accountability? And I think those will really integrate as well into processes and protocols that will be developed by those using these technologies when it comes to human-machine teamings and how do humans interact with these systems. So I think having that sort of language and discussion very early on in the process is essential.
Thank you. And there was one point that you highlighted, Charlie, about convergence of technologies. I think this is a very important point. I think one of the risks that we have is, AI is we call it AI, but it means so much, and it can, the way in which it's going to be applied is going to be very context specific. So and very domain specific, and the impact that AI will have in the biological weapons field is going to be very different from the impact that AI is going to have in cyber or in outer space, etc. So one of the risks that we should avoid is wanting to solve everything at once, because the way potentially we could see this, if we try to project ourselves 6 months in the future when this project is hopefully gonna wrap up, what we would like to do is focus on the level that sits above each of the individual kind of domain-specific applications. Because our assumption is that each domain-specific application is going to have to deal with the impact of AI on the CBMs they already have. So how will AI change the usability or the effectiveness of CBMs that have already been negotiated in each of those regimes? But the goal here is, can we develop kind of a general purpose set of CBMs that kind of sits above all of the specific kind of buckets that can then be looked up as a reference point independently from the field of application? Because when you start to explore different convergence areas, then it becomes very, very complicated to find one solution that can fit multiple problems. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Just going to see if in the room there is anyone else that would like to ask a question. Please. Wait until it turns red. Yeah, here we go. Oh, no.
So thank you very much. I'm Julien Tony, the Swiss ambassador to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. Thanks a lot to UNIDIR and all the panelists for those very extremely interesting explanations. Going back to the question of different risk that you mentioned, I'm not sure that you mentioned this risk, and I'm referring also to exactly what you said about convergence. Is there a kind of risk related that the AI system would develop its own independence in the different system that are really active? That's a kind of, the robots being more and more independent in the different programmings. And I don't know if you really mentioned this kind of risk during your presentation. Thank you.
No, thank you. So there's a little bit on that in the report itself. Of course, I just I just presented a very sort of glossed over overview of it now. So the idea of existential risk has been, and sort of AI that writes its own code and or its own source code and starts to act in a way that is independent of the human design and human intent. So that's an area of risk where we didn't really want to go so much into detail because, of course, the whole existential risk debate is very valid, and of course it has a lot of interesting points. But for the purpose of discussing CBMs or something that is more actionable, sort of in the immediate term, we wanted to really focus on uses of the technology or on more sort of I wouldn't say realistic, but areas of the technology where the development or the trajectory is very clear and very more predictable in the short term. So of course the idea of AI running havoc and sort of becoming very, very autonomous or independent is just not an area we wanted to look so much into at this stage. And if you go into discussion of international security, you can go even further. So, for example, one expert suggested to me at one point in a conversation, we can also look at climate change. So, the way AI is developed is, of course, is a very resource-heavy, resource-intensive process, and it uses minerals and metals that are mined from various parts of the world. So in a way, you can link AI with other security concerns. I mean, the connections then can be so much broader. But again, in a way, the goal of CBMs is informed also the way we develop the taxonomy. So we wanted to keep it more in the ambit of discussions that can really be tackled very concretely in the coming years. But of course, the existential risks are perhaps more long term, and we just didn't get so much into that at this stage, and for the purpose of this project.
Thank you. I'm going to try to combine, in the interest of time, a couple of questions that I see online. That kind of touch also upon something we discussed at the event yesterday, which is the issue of data and what kind of risks can be associated with data. In both of your research, what are some of the most pressing risks that data introduces to AI, and if you can articulate what role could CBMs have in the context of risks generated by data?
No, thank you. So, of course, the question of data is a fundamental question in AI, generally speaking. And we cannot escape a conversation about AI when we discuss CBMs or when we discuss any sort of risk mitigation, because a lot starts with data. And actually, in the report, you will find a section which discusses this in a bit more detail. So there are a lot of,
like kind of a danger. And so the question is how you see mitigating that, because, like, for example, a financial institute will think like, okay, everything that is tagged, I'm much better like just to right away check them. But in military, it's not necessarily, because one of the things that you're doing, if you're talking about fairness, you might tag more of a certain population, right, compared to others. And then there is a problem that the bank need to, or like the financial institute need to follow certain standards, right? But military don't. So what do you see, like how that actually implemented in that? Because maybe there is much more risk over there that, they want to, okay, everyone that are tagged, like right away, like will do like certain things to mitigate, but maybe it will not be fair, but it may be more secure. So how you kind of, balance the two?
Thank you. So I think this is perhaps can be the topic of a much broader discussion. It was very often raised, for example, in the context of discussions on lethal autonomous weapon systems, so where AI was discussed a lot in relation to the targeting process. So I think I just want to say that we should be very wary of just assuming or implying that war doesn't have rules. Of course, there's the international humanitarian law that imposes a lot of obligations on states. So it's not that the way we use AI in the military doesn't mean that we will not care about the accidents part or about the mistakes that the system does. Only that, of course, there is a calculation that goes into the way AI is. I mean, AI would be used is that it's a calculation between operational success and also applying the law. So it's that fine balance that states have to sort of work with. But I think it's very important to remember that we are not that militaries are also risk averse in a way that they don't want to just use system because they are very they prove to be highly performant in testing, and that means that they will just use them. There is also a lot of process of really vetting a technology and understanding if it's in compliance with the law. I think perhaps it's just risky to assume that militaries are not or would not be by default wary of risks or implications of using a technology that can have accident, can make mistakes. So,
yeah, and I will just foot stomp everything that Ioana said and emphasize the fact that, if there are biases in systems, for example, militaries are incentivized to be aware of that and to calibrate accordingly to that. In theory, right, militaries want systems that are effective, that are not going to introduce surprises, that are going to operate in line with their strategic aims and goals. And so it is in their best interest to be aware of those and to increase transparency as well and to participate in some of these standards and mechanisms to ensure that they are being self-reflective on these, and also that other states, again, there's not a risk of that kind of miscalculation and miscommunication. So I always like to emphasize that point, that biased systems don't work well, and militaries do not adopt systems that don't work well. So.
Thank you. Just looking in the room, this is your last chance if you have a question, because we're running out of time. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question or make a comment to our speakers? Okay, well, if that's not the case, I'm also looking, Ambassador Robin, if you have any final thoughts?
Well, there was already a comparison made with lethal autonomous weapon systems, and indeed, it's not that there is nothing around. In fact, there is, I would say, a growing convergence, almost consensus, I would say, on the fact that totally autonomous systems are not allowed. So that's step one. Then, of course, you will have to regulate the other ones that where there is, for instance, those that are allowed, where there indeed is a human control, and then we get, and that was said already, into the definition phase, what is meaningful human control and things like that. And that is, of course, quite a challenge. And I think the same was also said on the one hand on regulating systems or talking about behaviors. If you go back, there was, I think somebody mentioned incidents at sea. In the good old days, when we had Hugo Grotius trying to define international law and the law of the sea, we had the cannon shot rule in a way that defined the territorial sea. That was 3 miles, and for many years it was 3 miles. Of course, at a certain time, the cannons became much more powerful, but it doesn't mean that certain things you can still do. I remember also giving briefings to military, going on missions to certain areas where there's high tension, and then they said, well, yeah, well, what can we do, what can we not do? Well, it's very much then about responsible behavior. If you do this with your ship and you move in a certain way around, is that still responsible? That is at sea, and we're now having the discussion on doing it in space or not doing it in space. How much distance should there be between satellites? How close can you come, etc. So those discussions, I think that was said before also, discussions from cyber, from space will also influence the discussion on autonomous artificial intelligence, and I think, and the step in between is very much autonomous weapon systems. So this was one of the reasons why in the intervention of my delegation, we put the three together, and we developed some thoughts on it during the general debate, and we hope that this will be picked up later when we have discussions on what I would call the new domains and emerging technologies. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador, for offering these additional thoughts. So we've come to the end of this very interesting 75 minutes. I would like to thank you all for coming, whether here in person in New York or online. I hope you enjoyed the briefing. It was definitely very insightful. Do take the time to go over the report in your own time. If you have questions, follow-ups, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. And with that, I just want to invite you to, a round of applause for our speakers, and I wish you a good day.